let's say that you are a security guard and you are working at a Walmart and you're trying to prevent shoplifting from happening. Let's say in 2024, you do an excellent job at this. You're the absolute best Walmart in the country at stopping shoplifting. You get an award, there's a big ceremony, everybody recognizes you as doing a great job. Let's say though in 2025, you change some things at the store thinking that it might help with shoplifting. One of your main tools is broken and won't be returning maybe till summer, but maybe towards the end of the year. Maybe you won't have this tool till 2026. And let's say that you have a wave of shoplifting, like week after week, lots of shoplifting, lots of things stolen from the store. And then let's say in the middle of that, mysteriously, Walmart decides to extend your contract as a security guard, even though all the stuff is being stolen, and you seem to be doing a worse job in 2025 than you were in 2024 when you were great.
So to win MLS Cup, you have to run your team like a Walmart. Is that what I'm
Not
getting?
necessarily. It's an analogy. But you are catching on why I brought this up. Got this today from Tom Bogert. The LA Galaxy and head coach Greg Vanney have reached a contract extension, sources say. They have not won a single match this season. They played 13 games. I regaled the press box on Wednesday about a result that was happening as we were watching Austin play Atlanta. And of course, that unhappy ending, and let people know that Galaxy were up 2-0 at halftime, remember? And then Philadelphia got it to 2-2. They equalized. And then 90 plus 6. The Union score a goal. The Galaxy continue to be winless in 13 matches this season. With their draws, they're on pace to get 8 points this season. And I was worried about Greg Vanney's job, but he's got extension.
Yeah, look, here's something that we can definitely say. Greg Vanney has made history at LA Galaxy.
He sure has.
Emergency podcast. They did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, hurry up, shut up, hurry up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. And based on what happened on Wednesday and what we're looking at in the next couple of weeks, we're going to die, or maybe not. Well, we all eventually die, but maybe not right now. But definitely worried about Austin and where they are at this stage of the season. Moisés, how are you feeling?
The draw that felt like a loss against Atlanta definitely felt like a loss. It was an at the death. Oh man, that shouldn't have happened. But had they scored another goal, it wouldn't have been a problem. The big problems are still the big problems. I'm not having the easiest time comprehending people saying that the players don't care or that they're not trying to win or that they don't want to win because these guys
Yeah.
all seem like they really desperately want to win. Same
Mhm.
with the coaching staff. I also don't understand people. I mean, at this point, I think I get where people are left grasping at straws, just
Sure.
trying to figure out how it makes sense. I can get
Mhm.
that. But just logically speaking, I don't see a sporting operation that is actively trying not to win. That doesn't make sense to me. And
Mhm.
in fact, seems very, very frustrated with the fact that they are not winning because they have a lot of really great pieces. The problem seems to be that not all of the pieces seem to work terribly well with each other.
Right. And that's up to Estevez and the players to figure out or not figure out. And again, for people that are already calling for him to be fired, I mean, he's had 13 games, so maybe we give him a little bit more time to see if this all works. But definitely, I think there are probably some furrowed brows in the front office about this time. And I think definitely we're going to see the next few games if there can be anything coming out of this nosedive, because I think it is a nosedive right now. They are 1-4-2 in their last 7 league matches. That to me indicates that there are problems. This is not just obviously a single game or 2 game kind of blip. And
Yeah.
again, like we talked about, it's Vancouver at home on Saturday, then Houston in an Open Cup match, which I think just for fan confidence and good vibes and all that, I think is an important game, maybe even more so important than Vancouver, which I'm already chalking as a loss. And then at Minnesota, which got a little bit more interesting with a development that we thought we were going to have the first time that Austin played Minnesota, but it is now upon us. And then Real Salt Lake and San Diego to round out the month. It is tough. I made predictions. I think next week we might revisit where those predictions are versus what the team has actually done, because we'll have enough critical mass at this point to see what they have done with my diminished expectations.
Here's the way that I've been thinking about these couple games since the Atlanta game on Wednesday is that I don't know that anybody expects a win against Vancouver. A draw against
Right.
Vancouver could feel like a win for the players. But if there is a thing that would turn things around the most, it would be them impossibly, some, ourselves maybe included, would say
Mhm.
somehow squeaking out a win against Vancouver at home.
Mhm.
Combined with what I consider to be an absolute must win for local rivalry reasons, if nothing else, and
Yep.
staying in Open Cup, the 1-2 punch of beating the best team in the West, I think many would say the best team in the league. And yeah, Nico said it, but he's also not wrong. Beating them and then beating an in state rival to advance to the quarterfinals of Open Cup, that is something that cools some embers a little bit, has people putting the sharpening stones down from their pitchforks. Maybe. The response has been pretty vocal and rabid among the fan base of just calling for whatever heads are nearby. And it's the culmination of what the last couple of years have resulted in, where in isolation, 13 games into a new coach with a significantly turned over roster, one would expect there are still cohesion issues to be fixed. People's patience
Mhm.
is non-existent, let alone thin. And that's
Yeah.
just where people's heads are at.
Right. And that kind of comes up with this idea of the ideal 11 and trying to play an ideal 11, as Estevez had said, match after match. We saw John Gallagher Wednesday after the match, and he was gracious enough to answer a lot of questions because a lot of his teammates had already gone out to watch the Unified game, which we got to watch, which was an absolute delight. I love that they do that every year. And this year, especially with Ilya and his connections with that, I thought was special. And so we talked to him, and he talked about being exhausted, basically dehydrated, a little dizzy at the end of that game, having gone full 90s and with Dessler out and probably still out a little bit longer. He'll be called on to do this again. If you are stacking this many games up against each other, and that's already been a concern, it's starting to get hot. And I think it's really hard to do this. And Bukari has been rotated some, but do we expect Ozuni out on Saturday? Do we think that it's hard to know because Danny is out, Dessler's out.
Taylor's out.
There's Robert Taylor's out. There's one less center back to rotate with Väisänen having been dealt, not being replaced yet. So it's really challenging to rotate when your roster is already depleted like it is, and there's only kind of so many second team call-ups that can go around. They can't really do any more activation until the summer, and I'm sure. I don't know if I'm sure, but I'm pretty confident given Roto's track record that there are a couple of players lined up. Also, given Roto's track record, I don't know that his hit rate is maybe what we thought it was based on the evidence that we've got so far. It's still early. I'm reminded of Peter Musa in 2024, also a player that Nico Estevez got at the start of that season. Eventually, Musa came good. Of course, Estevez was fired and then Musa came good. Those things are not correlations. Musa's wife had just had a baby and he was acclimating to life in the US, things that sound very familiar with Ozuni, hence the comparison. But yeah, very concerned. I projected at the start of the season, somebody asked me how many goals do you think he'll have? And I said 11. And he's 10 away from that. We're almost halfway through the season. Halfway through the season comes May 31st. So it's at the end of this month. So we're at a critical point here.
So what you're saying is if Ozuni puts up dual hat tricks, that gets him a significant ways toward that 11 figure. You
Yeah,
said
puts him back on pace.
puts him back on pace. You said or you're guessing. At the very least, you know that you're guessing. That much is certain. You know that you're guessing that there's
Mhm.
probably some stuff happening. It seems that the beginning of the season at the season kickoff thing downtown, Roto told people that there was somebody definitely coming in the summer. So there's somebody definitely coming. How many somebodies that is, we'll see what has happened in the intervening months. I feel like hit rate wise, we saw some really promising stuff from Bookery last year. And
Yeah,
there is some sort of major cohesion issue within that triangle of DPs, such
right.
that we've got rumors that Red Star is interested in dealing to get him back
Right.
for Champions League run, and that he
Mhm.
has interest in going back. And
Yeah, that was a little further down in our outline, but yeah, we're
yeah,
on the topic. So let's talk about that now. What do we think about that? And if that happens, does that maybe change the alchemy a little bit about how the roster is constructed? Do you then go after, rather than TAM number 10, as we were thinking might be the case, do you go after a TAM winger or U22 winger? And then does that all of a sudden open things up for a DP10? Not that Kevin De Bruyne is probably going to come here. And like we were talking about in the press box on Wednesday, not that that might necessarily work out that well for Austin, but it is an interesting prospect to think of. Okay, clearly we saw what Evander does for Cincinnati. We saw what Acosta did for Cincinnati before that. Acosta hasn't quite done that at Dallas, but if you get the right pieces around a really high functioning 10, you can do some great things in MLS. Is that maybe the roadmap now? And if there is interest in Bucharest, do we chalk that up as a failed experiment, thank him for his time here, and then try to fix things while, for the meantime, Austin's still in a playoff place? I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case at the end of May, but if they're in that zone, if they've got enough points, and again, they bank some points early, do they get somebody who can come in and immediately make an impact?
it, the summer is something that is a little bit differently chaotic this year than it usually is because we've also got Club World Cup to contend with. And there will be very high priced players and very high priced teams that are looking to shift and move things in advance of that competition in July. And I feel like, as active as the market tends to be, it could be yet more active in ways that are, like I said, really chaotic and difficult to expect. So there are the things that it looks like Austin is probably in the market for, and there are the pieces that just happen to be available in the market visibly. But all kinds of crazy stuff can happen once those transfer windows start opening. Knowing that various of these clubs, I mean, look, River Plate wanted to get Sebastian Driussi back and have him there long enough to cohere so that he would be ready to show up in a Club World Cup.
Now, six
Various,
goals in 6 games. I think
you
he's
know,
cohered.
yeah, I think he's figured it out. I think he remembered how to play Argentine soccer. But I feel like we're going to see that from a lot of those clubs with very large checkbooks. And there will be people moved around and people who may suddenly become available, who people will be surprised are suddenly available because they just do not fit into the narrow, well, we're going to try to win this Club World Cup thing that FIFA is trying to make into a big deal, which has existed previously, but they're actually taking it
Mhm.
seriously, it seems, in terms of trying to make it a bigger deal than it has been in the past.
Right.
That to me introduces a new level of chaos into what could be some completely unexpected deal making that is stuff that isn't even on Roto's radar at the moment, which
Right.
could be an opportunity to make some fixes in places where things are just not working out.
Yeah, and as reported earlier this week, according to an MLS source who we know to be
Mystery.
De Bruyne, was interested in Austin, but they apparently could not meet the salary requirements that he had. Of course, if Bucharest goes, he's only on 1 million. And the only reason he's a DP rather than a TAM player is because of his transfer fee. But I don't know, depending on kind of what, if that move happens and if Star does pay a transfer fee the other way, I don't know what that does in terms of the money, or want to think that there's maybe somebody a little bit more under the radar who would be a difference maker. I think De Bruyne will be a little bit of a circus when he comes, wherever he comes to. Chicago, probably, maybe Miami, because Miami does those kind of things. But my hope is that they are going to either force some kind of move to ignite some sort of chemistry, or they're going to have to develop chemistry, some other way with the players they have. And I'm losing more hope game after game that that's actually going to take place.
I'm coming at it, I think, from a little bit of a different angle in that
Okay.
I don't see the complete depletion of hope on that front necessarily, but I can
Okay.
certainly sympathize with what you're seeing. And a part of it is the difference in disappointed faces in the locker room and the vibes of things is that
Hmm.
compared to even the earlier parts of the dark depths of 2023 and 2024, it was a bit more, oh God, my career is over. I'm going to sit over here in the corner.
Hmm.
With these guys, with this particular group, it's a different overall vibe. Even though some of the guys are the
Yeah.
same, there is this sort of resilience that some of them, look, they made it through both of those seasons and they're
Hmm.
still here and still figuring it out and have not given up. And a good chunk of the new guys who just want to keep pushing and want to keep figuring it out. That El Paso game was rough to watch. Something all
Until
the
it wasn't.
until it wasn't. We saw it unlock,
Hmm.
and it really takes these guys doing it in public in front of the actual fans and having
Hmm.
an actual competitive game on the line. That's the thing that puts the fire underneath them.
Yeah.
They all
And
know,
that,
like they all have the pressure that they need, but when it comes to that finishing touch that forges diamonds, that's what to me it is really taking, and it's painful for people to have to watch. But
mhm.
I am seeing gradual improvement game by game, and I swear I'm not on the coaching staff, and I don't
Yeah.
draw a check for saying so. But
Right.
there are positive signs of improvement that, man, if they can pull off a win against Vancouver and look
Mhm.
as good as we've seen glimpses of them being able to be, that changes a lot of things in terms of mentality in ways that translate to a much more optimistic May than we're currently looking at.
I really thought the Atlanta game was going to be that. When I went on Soccer Down Here earlier this week and I talked about this being the constant disappointment to us all derby, the idea behind that was Atlanta and Austin had these expectations going into the season, and they're certainly underperforming those expectations. But I also said in that interview that I thought that this was going to be a get right game for Austin. We saw, Estevez wasn't wrong in terms of his assessment that there were chances created and they did look lively in the first part of the game. But then there was just this huge drop off, and you really saw in the last 10 minutes of the first half, and then obviously leading up to the goal, you saw that kind of dynamism. And then he saw enough there to leave those players on the field, which of course gets into that whole ideal 11 question. Thought that they could really get that second goal, and then did not get that second goal, and then put on subs and tried to milk the clock. And we've seen that in the
Mm,
Wolf era before. We've seen that tactic fail. You're going to put on an extra center back. It's the Sex Panther paradigm, right? 60%
yeah.
of the time it works all the time. And that's what Wolf Ball was. Are we going to see that same thing now with the step out? The early parts of the season felt different.
Mhm.
The 1-0 wins that they would gut out to me felt like they were more actively playing defense and they were stopping things. Whereas in that Atlanta game, it was really about we are going to try to waste time. That is our number one priority. And
Mm.
then it got beat by a play that might have been offside. We'll never know.
Yeah.
But
So the thing that I want to ratchet people back on is
mhm,
these players are going to have to play in the heat. They've known they're going to have to play in the heat. The nature of the heat on Wednesday night is something that they prepared for as best they could. And as much
yeah,
as I appreciated Nico's faith in his players, who really they were showing some signs of life, as you were saying, not pulling some of those guys off before they hit that wall, that was the crucial mistake of the game to me.
yeah,
It absolutely was a mistake. And you saw it in the 1,000 yard stares on those guys who did the full 90. That would have been a winnable game if they'd initiated the subs earlier. And if anything, that leaning into his optimism, which to me is not the reason that Josh would go slow on subs. That optimism is both a credit to, I think, the difference in coaching style that Nico has, but also it was the fatal flaw of that game. My impression was that it definitely landed with him that, yes, it was obviously a mistake. And it's something that will
mhm,
definitely, you can get high on hopium and you can get high on temporary effect hopium. And I think that's what he got a whiff of. and he's going to be real careful to keep his mask securely fitted against possible cross-contamination.
You could call it a gamble, you could call it a calculated risk. I really do think that in trying to play for that second goal, he pushed those players to the limit in terms of what they could do human performance
past the
wise,
limit.
thinking, well, yeah, probably past the limit in thinking, okay, they're going to get the second goal and then we can just time waste, put in the defensive subs and see the game out. And yeah, that didn't work, unfortunately. And so now you've got this whole question of, okay, Vancouver, right? So do you rotate? Do you take that as a loss, or do you put all your chips on the table and try to make that a kind of season transforming win, or at least a riding the ship sort of draw? Or do you rotate and then beat Houston, knock on wood, and then get into the quarterfinals of the Open Cup and have that as something to look forward to and galvanizing? And then that Minnesota game got a little bit more interesting because Joseph Rosales, who had, shall we say, an incident towards the end of a game a few weeks back, has been suspended for 3 games for said incident. I believe it was a racist comment directed at Manuel Sabi from Vancouver, if I'm remembering this right.
Yep.
That game at the end went a little sideways with that. So he will be out presumably for, depending on the suspension. I think he's just going to serve it. It doesn't sound like you're going to appeal or anything like that. That does make Minnesota a little bit thinner heading up there. I am not terribly confident about Austin's chances in Minnesota, given where Minnesota is this year. They are also pretty good. Not quite Vancouver good, but definitely they are, I think, officially now in the upper echelon of West teams this year.
The tack that I think I'm going to take in looking at these 3 fixtures right in front of us, rather than predict likelihood, what I would say is the overall arc of those 3 games that is the absolute most favorable, while, yes, being possibly overly optimistic, but that I could see them squeaking out, is a win against Vancouver, a win against Houston, an away draw against Minnesota that feels like a win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what they need the most.
That feels very best case scenario.
Very best.
Like 3 wins seems like an impossibility.
Yeah, two wins and a draw out of that feels very, very improbable. So again, I'm not predicting probability. What I'm saying is even though they'll say, oh yes, we only take it 1 game at a time. Sure. But you also have to look at the fact that these guys are human beings and you can't run the wheels off of them. How do they get that? Do they roll crazy and put Irvin Torres, CJ Fodre, and Riley Thomas all out as starters against Vancouver just to see what happens?
Sure.
Screw it. Let's see what happens. Rest a few guys, knowing that Houston match has a lot of stuff attached to it. Or do you do the thing that we've seen European teams that are technically up for a treble do, is go, well, if we miss the Super Cup or if we miss the whatever League Cup, as long as we're still heading for the league title, what calculus does he use to prioritize here? I don't personally have an estimation of if he makes that kind of sacrificial play. I don't think that he does, because I don't think his players want to do anything other than absolutely kill themselves over the next 3 weeks and try to get as many 3-pointers as they can out of this. So how do they get there? To me, his 9, his 10, and his 11, all 3 of them have got to start against the top team in the West. Otherwise, what are they getting paid for? That is the kind of expectation that Roto has said that they have of DPs. A DP should be able to start and play a full 90 with minimal resting and rotation. That's what they're being paid for. I see all 3 of them possibly starting. I don't know that we see Buka benched, but it might be Uzuni's time in the bin to ride the pine. Against Houston, I think we see a shockingly less rotated side compared to the people who started against Vancouver than people might expect. And I think Minnesota is where we then see rotation. I think these guys are being prepped and want the challenge of proving how good they are. That is the impression that I have from these guys. As down in the dumps as they were, to have Superman and Brad and John Gallagher wobbling on his feet, The feeling that I get is that we will see less rotation in these next two games than people might assume. And we just
Yeah.
may not see the rotation really happen until Minnesota. That's the way it feels in my gut. Do we see some second team call ups? Maybe one or two. We probably won't know until the other side of us recording as we speak.
That worries me if they're waiting till that point for that level of rotation.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good idea. You saw those players after the Atlanta match, and they look pretty worn. They just got off the field. It was hot. It has not been hot like that so far this year. This little heat wave that we're having here just kind of came out of nowhere a little early in the year. Again, I don't know if this is global warming, what we're going to deal with now on a yearly basis. Could be that. But yeah, they have to, if they are going to really press the pedal to the floor on these next couple of games. And hopefully a high performance team is monitoring everybody very carefully, and hopefully decisions are being made based on that. And it's not just, we got to go for it. To me, in terms of the calculus, I think at this point, try to tread water in the league until summer and prioritize that cup game for now. Because again, I think if they do get the quarters, then that becomes something to rally around. So that doesn't necessarily salvage a season if they miss the playoffs, but it is something that certainly would be, I think, helpful to Balm fans. We joke about Copa Tejas, but US Open Cup is actually a substantial trophy.
It is.
And
Just
it is a fine thing to win.
To me, the symbolic concern is doing less than their best against a team as significant as Vancouver and dealing with the fan reaction of the people that are still showing up to games regularly. If they do not show up and show up big, they are fully cognizant of what those boos sounded like at that El Paso game.
Yeah.
And do you want that to become the trend of the season? When that, it was startling. It is still it's still rattling that happened. That is something that definitely landed heavy for these guys. Right. And part of the reason that the Atlanta draw felt like such a significant loss, and not just the draw that felt like a loss, as they say, is that I think a lot of those guys thought that they had turned a corner, and that 104-degree heat just slapped them right back in the face.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Had they held on, 1-0 win against a bad Atlanta team wouldn't have been fantastic, but it would have been
3
something
points.
to build on. They've shed 2 points now that they could have had, and they might really want those back when it comes time. Because again, just where things are going, assuming that they are in the playoff hunt by September, I have a feeling at this point right now that they're going to be on the lower part of that, and they're going to be trying to get above that 9th place line. And right now, the way they're constituted, the way they're gelling, I don't know that they're going to get there again and again. That would be 3 straight years of missing the playoffs. And then you have to really worry about, what does the 2026 season bring for Estevez? Is that then the season where he could theoretically be dismissed in summer if they're continuing to underperform?
I think it is real easy to look at the bottom of the hill when things are heading downhill. But for the purpose of this podcast and this week, I'm just thinking we very clearly know what it looks like if they really start tumbling head over ass over head. What kind of effect does it have for them to finally really break the dam open against the best team in the West? That could be interesting. Is it likely to happen? No. But I would love to see the kind of form that would result from those guys getting that kind of result. To me, it would change. It would change the remainder of the matches in this month leading into the international break, and could very significantly change the trajectory of the season. And that's why, even though it seems risky, and even though it may even seem pretty illogical, I do not see them doing anything other than full force and trying to score in the first 60 seconds, let alone the first 5 minutes or 15 minutes.
Right. We shall see. Again, by next week, we're gonna know a little bit more about what's going on there. I'm eager to find out. So The other thing that I did to try to drill down on the team a little bit is I watched the 12 goals scored against them in their last four losses. That's something I did. I did not, obviously, I wrote this on the Tuesday, so did not factor the goal that got scored on them in Wednesday's match. But looking at those four losses that they've had and the 12 goals that were scored against them, starting with that Vancouver 5-1 game, the one thing that jumped out to me a little bit was game state wise, the transition defense gave up, by my count, 5.5 goals, because one of the goals I said was transition. Then they settled into defensive posture, but it was an in between sort of game state when the goal sequence initiated and then when it ended. And then in defensive posture, I had 3.5, two set pieces. And then when playing it out of the back goes wrong was one. In terms of players, like actually, I had responsible for two of the 12 goals, Cascante 1.5, team 4. So when there were breakdowns from multiple players and things like that. So I don't think there's one particular person that you can point to, but the transition defense thing is really concerning to me just because that was a thing that theoretically Estevez was supposed to fix. That's something that he fixed at Dallas. That's something that I thought they were getting a little bit better at in the early part of the season. And now, unfortunately, it looks like maybe that is still a concern. Maybe that is something that they are needing to work on. And again, I don't know what the right chemistry is necessarily in the midfield, because some of that can be a midfield issue in terms of looking at what the defense was doing the first part of the season versus now. I asked Gallagher about that after Wednesday. Specifically, he said, we look back at those last 2 minutes, especially the goal, and there's a recognition that we have the win in our hands and we just need to be a little bit more cohesive. Maybe the guys in the back, we got to tell the guys in front to get more compact and deny space in between lines, which we didn't do. I think the ball gets played into them centrally from a long ball and they pick it up and go behind it with some nice play, but ultimately it could have been stopped. And then he said after that, after diagnosing that goal, he says, the system is still the same and the defensive principle is still the same. Maybe we've just been a bit lackluster in certain moments, which obviously happens in Cincy with a quality player in Evander and some quality play on us tonight too. And again, yeah, with the Evander thing, that was the whole, was he marked? Was he not marked? I still contend that he was not marked on both of those goals. There were players around him on the second goal where he made that fabulous assist, but also he had the time and space to make that fabulous assist. And also he's a really good player and I wish we had him right now.
I think Dr. Coach Gallagher diagnosed things properly. I mean, that was crystal clear for as wobbly on his feet as he was after killing himself for 90 plus. That's exactly what happened. So I don't think it's an analytical issue. I think that they're all seeing it. I laughed when you said that you watched back those 12 most recent goals because Phil West, I don't know what it is you do for fun, sir. And frankly, I worry for you.
It wasn't that.
It wasn't that. I hope it's more fun than that. I feel like that exact kind of focus was exactly what I was alluding to, seeing in these guys, where it wasn't they are lost in space and don't know how to get back on course. It's they very clearly see where back on course is and they just want to get there. That's not the same as what I saw in 23 and 24. I don't know. This is something that these guys are obsessing over in the right ways from what I can tell, to the extent that we can know. We will hopefully see some fruits from their labor of looking at really unfortunate tape. The other thing is you evenly spreading out the blame. Phil, we need heads on pikes, sir. We need someone to blame. I don't know if you heard this, but earlier we noted that somebody's head must roll. That's the only thing that will help. The beatings will continue until performance improves. Period. End of story. That's the only way this gets any better, Phil. So I think the solution is take all of the center backs out and whip them. That's probably what is going to actually improve things.
Awesome. Good plan. All right. Let's talk some hope for the future. Let's talk some Irvin Torres.
Irvin Torres got another call up since last we recorded. Congratulations to him. I think he's very steadily on the same path as other players who have followed him, who followed these kinds of call ups to a supplemental roster spot on the first team. Incredibly talented player. I look at the second team and players like him, Jorge Alastue, who just recently got there and is their new number 10, who has been real promising. You see holes in the first team midfield. I see where Jorge Alastue fits in very nicely once he proves himself, where Irvin Torres fits in very nicely once he proves himself, to the extent that the coaching staff need him to prove himself. I would love to see him showing up dudes 10 years as senior, because I know that he's capable of it. Second team notched a win against Ventura County, formerly known as Galaxy Dos, a 1-0 win. It was Jimmy time, and the 1-0 got them across the line. As Arsenal fans, not saying that everybody listening to this is an Arsenal fan, 1-0 to the Arsenal That was the song as well as the curse of watching Arsenal. And
Right.
if the first team, second team relationship reflects itself, as we have seen in different good times and bad times, maybe there is something to the fact that the second team is seeing some renewed success as they have found their cohesion with some new pieces and pieces that count as homegrowns or have green cards and aren't on loan and that kind of thing. I hope for the first team's sake that some of that good energy flows back their way.
Right. And just to ground you on Southern California geography, because this is my
Yeah.
favorite thing about Ventura County being the team. This is like if Austin FC played in San Marcos
Yeah.
and the second team played in Georgetown. Good times.
Yep. 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 It makes so much sense.
Not a robust crowd, I take it, for that match.
It was pretty light. It was pretty light.
Okay.
But like I said, it was Jimmy time all night. Jimmy time all night.
Woohoo. All right, let's see. We got to hit one other thing. A lot of this focuses on soccer. Some things obviously transcend soccer, some things reach soccer and other matters and intersect. So, Moisés, do you want to explain what I'm talking about? Okay.
Brigada de Oro, a Latin American supporters group in Nashville, due to threats of ICE raids on their membership, decided, I and many other people think rightly so, to no show due to the expectation of harassment, if not whatever it is that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is currently doing in the country. And there's something to the increased police presence that has been seen at MLS matches this season in particular. Weird how that's happening. And I don't know that it is being spurred by any front offices. I would not put it at the feet of MLS or the individual clubs. But there is a different wind blowing in the country. And seeing a predominantly Latin fan base for a sport being targeted like this, disappointed isn't the word. It's something to be noted. It is something to always have somewhere in the back of your head going to an MLS match, an MLS Next Pro match. Look at who is on the field, look at who is in the stands.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody is there. And there are definitely people who do not even fall into the category of undocumented or on the path to a green card refugee or people in those vulnerable populations, people who are U.S. citizens, people who have
Right.
their green cards, who are specifically avoiding spaces where they could be sent to a prison in El Salvador. And it doesn't matter if it's a mistake. We've already seen
Right.
it doesn't matter if it's a mistake. People will get sent there, and it's being done as a message. That's what's out there, and that's what's happening. And it is something that definitely will affect MLS attendances. Sellout streaks be damned, and tickets at going at a premium on the secondary market, there will be people missing from the stands because MLS stadiums are an unsafe space all of a
Right.
sudden.
Where they should be safe spaces and they should be these kind of cathedrals of joy that we know them to be. And it's something that puts people who feel that they are at risk, rightly at risk, in the public, visible. And if ICE wants to capture people, they know where to go.
Yeah.
So that's why La Brigada d'Oro is not participating. And BJ Callahan had a quote about this, Nashville's coach, but it could have been stronger. I'll just read it in full.
Could have been.
And
Could have
just kind
been.
of let it sink in. So he said, yes, we were aware of La Brigada's decision to cancel its tailgate, and we missed their presence at the last match. As a team, every time we compete on the field, we strive to represent the city of Nashville and compete in a way that makes our fans proud. We remain committed to that each and every time we step on the field for all our fans. So a nice sentiment, but certainly we've seen Greg Popovich, we've seen Steve Kerr, two prominent NBA basketball coaches who have stepped out and they've been a little bit more political in these kind of situations. Vanni Sartini was reliably political. I wonder, as things like this continue and as it begins to touch this part of our lives, what will there be a league response? Will there be fan responses? Will there be coach responses, player responses, things like that? I know Los Verdes had a statement that they made in solidarity with the Brigada d'Oro.
The thing that I think of immediately is we are 3 months into this long season. 3 months. And this is where things are just over 3 months into this presidential administration. The Los Verdes statement in English reads, Los Verdes honors and stands with the act of bravery and defiance that La Brigada de Oro and their football family showed by canceling their match day activities in attendance at last week's Nashville SC match due to increased ice activity in their area. The stand should be a safe place where we stand in shared passion for football y comunidad. No member should feel unsafe in their community due to nationality, ethnicity, or immigration status. Our family and our community are not complete when we are not all here. Supporters should not have to choose between safety and sport. This kind of targeted harassment does not and will not stop with Nashville. We stand alongside our football family throughout the United States in defiance of xenophobia and racism. Y'all means all, except ICE and anyone attacking our community. Fight ignorance, not immigrants. Abolish ICE. A statement I fully, wholeheartedly agree with.
And most of Los Verdes did too.
Yeah.
My understanding is it was a near unanimous vote.
Yeah, of those who opted in to vote, it was 3 or 4 people who voted thumbs down to the limited extent that those people commented. One of them, it had to do with wording or specifically bringing up ICE. But it was well over 100 people in Slack. I'm not sure how many more via email or Google form. Speaking for myself, the son of a political refugee who was a permanent resident of the United States before he died. There are people in the current administration, the vice president for one, who have voiced an interest in changing the notion of there being tiers of citizenship. And specifically, the Supreme Court is dealing with things about trying to eliminate birthright citizenship. They're not going to stop with the way that things are defined now because they want to keep redefining them to suit themselves. And there are people active and powerful in the United States right now that would like for my U.S. citizenship to be considered lesser than others because one of my parents was not a U.S. citizen, even though he was a full legal resident of the United States under sanctioned refugee status.
Right.
They've been revoking that status from people. Anything that can be made, they've decided that they can unmake. And so even though I have a relative position of privilege in when I go to these matches, I'm in the press box and I have a credential around my neck, that doesn't change the fact that my name is spelled the way that it is and it looks as different as it does. It doesn't change the fact that I walk into stores with my hair in a top knot and get looks from people. And there are people wearing red baseball caps. And not everybody will be fine. Because I've actually been told by people, oh, you'll be fine. You're not one of them. Well, depends on who you're talking to. Yeah, it's not in a good place, and we don't expect it to get better before it probably gets a great deal worse.
Right. You just don't know by looking at someone like what they are. Like me, for instance, I have a parent who was not an American citizen who immigrated at the time that I was born and eventually did become an American citizen, but became a naturalized citizen, so came here from another country. We are a nation of immigrants after all, and it's, to me, one of the beautiful things about this country is just that diversity, that ability for people of a lot of different origins to come together. And like you're saying, that's being really heavily contested right now.
And the one grace note that I'll give us an ending with is that, as the saying goes, en las buenas y las malas, in the good times and the bad, the folks in Los Verdes have gotten together in a record turnaround time over the course of this week to put together a banner commemorating the victims of the Lapu Lapu Festival attack in Vancouver earlier this year. The Lapu Lapu Festival commemorates a Filipino hero who fought against imperialism. There were 11 lives very sadly lost, who are commemorated in a banner that reads Isang Bagsak, which in Tagalog means when one of us falls, we all fall. When one of us rises, we all rise. A lot of poetry in 2 words. And that's part of the beauty of Tagalog as a language. And the banner reads that and has 11 Sangita flowers memorializing each of those victims with the Philippine star from the flag at the
Right.
center of each of those flowers. It's really beautiful. It'll be up on one of the two most visible capo stands during the match, and one of our capos, a Filipino American, everybody's buddy Vince, will be manning that capo stand for part of the game. And
Nice.
I'm glad that we got it done in time.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it there. And next week, obviously, we've got a Vancouver match to talk about. We've got an Open Cup match to talk about, however the team did. And then we look ahead to the rest of May. We look to Minnesota and we look to RSL, and then maybe touch a little bit on San Diego too, as well.
That is like the worst thing I've ever heard in the history of the 7 years that I've been on this planet.